We're now moving to question time. Order. We have now moved to question time. Order. I'm not starting this question time with such disorder. I said 3 times we had moved to question time. Senator Blythe.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Aged Care, Senator McAllister. We have heard from many South Australians who have contacted coalition officers in desperate need for home care support. A husband and wife in their late 80s who live in the Yorke Peninsula are unable to access services in their community. This gentleman lives with leukaemia and was assessed for care 2 years ago, but is unable to access services due to insufficient funding in the region. Wow. Minister, will you apologise to the older Australians of the Yorke Peninsula for failing to support their ageing community?
Thank you, Senator Blythe. Minister McAllister.
Thanks very much, President. Senator Blythe raises the case of a constituent in her electorate, and I thank her for doing so, because these stories are always important. And I repeat the offer that I made yesterday to Senator Askew, that where there is an individual who is experiencing particular circumstances, including the kind that Senator Blythe raises today, Senator Blythe, like all senators, is of course welcome to raise that directly with Minister Ray, and I know he will want to hear about that person's experience, Senator Blythe. More broadly, of course, this points to the significance of the reforms that have been legislated through this parliament and are shortly to commence. We owe a great deal to older Australians, and we owe them dignity and respect. Our government promised to lift the standard of aged care. That is what our reforms are doing, and there is more work to do. We've been clear about that. This task is ongoing. But it is important to remember that older Australians will benefit from the steps that have already been taken by this government and the steps that we intend to take as we implement the aged care reforms. Over the last 3 years, we have started to turn around very significant challenges in this sector. We've had to compress a lot of reform into that 3-year period because not very much was done in the decade that preceded it. Our government has invested $5.6 billion in a reform package which represents the greatest improvement to aged care in 30 years. We are delivering registered nurses on site in aged care more than 99% of the time, and more direct care
the time for
to over 250.
Senator Blythe, first supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, Brian from Geelong lives in the Deputy Prime Minister's electorate. He was recently approved for a Level 2 home care package, but due to further health issues, now requires reassessment. He is now part of the more than 120,000 older Australians waiting to be assessed for a home care package. Overall, he could be waiting longer than 2 years to receive the support he needs. Will you commit to immediately releasing new home care packages and progressing assessments?
Thank you, Senator Blythe. The time for asking the question has expired. Minister McAllister.
Thank you, President. Senator Blythe, in the first part of her question, speaks about assessments, and she raises the case of a person who is seeking an assessment. And again, I thank her for raising that matter. I acknowledge the challenges that people are facing. And it is why, as I indicated in my answer to Senator Blythe's primary question, that we are pursuing the reforms that we are pursuing, because older Australians do need to get the care that they need. Amidst that, as part of that, we are reforming the way that assessment takes place. In the past, there were many pathways into assessment because we do need people to have an opportunity to be assessed so that we can understand the care that they require. The Royal Commission told us that we need a single assessment process, and that is exactly what we're delivering. We are rolling out a new aged care assessment system. It will be quicker and will reduce wait times and improve the experience.
Senator Blythe, second supplementary.
Thank you. Will you commit to immediately releasing new home care packages and progressing assessments so that people like Brian can get the support that they need?
Thank you, Senator Blythe. Minister McAllister.
Thank you, President. As I've indicated in my answer to Senator Blythe's earlier questions and indeed over the course of questioning yesterday, aged care reform is a very high priority for this government. We made substantial advances during the last term and there is more to do this term, as has been made clear by Minister Butler, by Minister Ray.
Minister McAllister, please resume your seat. Senator Ruston.
On direct relevance, President, Senator Blythe's question was very clear about the releasing of home care packages. I'm wondering whether you could bring the minister to that point.
The minister is being relevant to the question. Thank you, Senator Ruston. Minister McAllister, please continue.
Thanks very much, President. And the senator asks about support for older people who need care at home. We are committed to delivering support, and indeed, on the 1st of November, a new program will be introduced, one that was navigated through this parliament with the support of those opposite, and we acknowledge that.
Order.
It is part of a broader strategy by our government to increase the care available and the quality of care available to older Australians. We owe them that, and we are determined to do so.
Thank you, Minister. Just before I come to you, Senator O'Neill, I draw to the attention of honourable senators the presence in the gallery of the Australian Political Exchange Council's 9th delegation from the Republic of Korea, led by Ms Ji-hee Park. On behalf of all senators, I wish you a warm welcome to Australia and in particular to the Senate. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. In its first term, the Albanese Labor government delivered cost of living relief to Australians that was focused on meeting the needs of Australians. How is the Albanese Labor government building on its first-term record to continue delivering cost of living relief for Australians?
Minister Wong.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator O'Neill for the question and for her focus always on cost of living relief and how to make sure we live in a fairer society. We have been focused as a government on delivering for Australians through cost of living relief for people doing it tough, a tax cut for every taxpayer with more to come, energy rebates for every household, stronger Medicare. While those opposite, of course, continue to be focused on themselves, we are focused on delivering for Australians, passing legislation to cut HECS debt by 20%, a change that will benefit 3 million Australians, passing legislation to protect the penalty rates and overtime rates of award-reliant Australian workers. Now, we all remember the low wages being a deliberate design feature of the Coalition's economic policy. In contrast, on this side, this government, this Albanese Labor government, has advocated every single year since our first election for increases to the minimum wage, supporting increases for almost 3 million working Australians, 3 million Australians. And, of course, last night cheaper medicines passed this Senate, measures that are saving another $200 million every year for Australians on top of the $1.5 billion they are not paying at the pharmacy counter from our efforts last term. We hear too many stories of Australians going to pharmacies having to choose which script to fill because they can't afford them all, so we have acted. We are making medicines cheaper, and that is what this government is all about, delivering for Australians.
Thank you, Minister. Senator O'Neill, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister, for that fulsome response. At last month's Economic Reform Roundtable, the Treasurer said that the government's focus remains on lifting living standards to leave Australians better off. What actions has the Albanese Labor government already taken to drive reforms that will leave Australians better off?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Wong.
Thank you. And Senator O'Neill, as you rightly point out, the Economic Reform Roundtable is all about delivering for Australians so we can keep working to lift living standards and keep working to create more opportunities for Australians. Together, Australians have made substantial progress on the economy. Inflation down, debt down, interest rates falling, unemployment low, the economy is growing, real wages are up, more than 1.1 million jobs created, and of course the gender pay gap is at a record low. And in some areas where the economic reform roundtable demonstrated considerable consensus, we have already taken action. And last week the Treasurer and Senator Farrell announced we will abolish a further 500 nuisance tariffs on top of the 457 abolished in July last year, and we announced we are reducing complexity and red tape in the construction code to get houses built quicker.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Wong, second supplementary.
Thank you, Senator Wong. How is the Albanese Labor government focused on delivering the better future Australians voted for in May? And why is it important to deliver on these priorities, but what stands in the way?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Thank you, O'Neill. Senator O'Neill, that is a very good question. We're focused on cost of living relief and building a better future for Australians. Those opposite, the Liberals and Nationals, are focused on fighting amongst themselves. And of course, it's the same old fight, over and over again. In one corner, we have Senator Hume urging you all to, and I quote, embrace net zero. And in the other corner, we have Mr Joyce, with the support from Senators Canavan and Antic, trying to hold the record for climate change denial. Meanwhile, Senator Cash and Mr Hastie, well, they're just waiting for this round to be over. And if we turn to housing, Senator O'Neill, President, it's Groundhog Day, with Senator Bragg trying to block Labor from building more houses and then claiming not enough houses are being built. Well, while those opposite fight amongst themselves, work to divide Australians, we're getting on with the job of delivering for Australians.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Little.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator McCarthy, and on Australians you have not delivered for. Since the Albanese government was elected in 2022, 6 Closing the Gap outcomes have regressed. Youth detention up 11%, suicide up 9.4%, adult incarceration up 3.5%, preschool attendance down 2.6%, and 1.2% fewer children commencing school developmentally on track. With these terrible outcomes only getting worse under Labor, why has the government shut the door on accountability by removing a standalone day for cross-portfolio Indigenous matters at the next supplementary budget estimates?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President, and I thank the senator for her question. And I would certainly reject outright that the Senate doesn't have an opportunity to question on closing the gap, President. In fact, the Senate now has multiple opportunities to question on closing the gap. They can go and ask questions on health in terms of the Health Minister's role. They can ask in housing, in the Housing Minister's role. They can ask in justice, in the Justice Minister's role.
Sorry, Minister McCarthy, could you resume your seat? Order. Order across the chamber, particularly on my left. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. In fact, I am absolutely thrilled to see the opposition wanting to become involved in seeing those targets drop and being a part of scrutinising in every department that you should. And that's what this is about, President. That's what this is about. I have travelled across the country talking to the cabinet ministers in those particular jurisdictions, Indigenous affairs, and we know, and we've taken it back to our cabinets.
Order.
I mean, clearly the other side don't want to listen.
Please resume your seat. Minister Wong.
Point of order. I wonder if the interjections which have been continuous from Senators Mackenzie, Senator Cash and Senator Little could cease for a moment.
As you no doubt heard, Minister Wong, I have been calling the chamber to order, and I have particularly called those on my left to order. I'll remind people Minister McCarthy has the right to be heard in silence. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, President. This matter is so serious in terms of First Nations people in this country. And what is shameful here today is the politicising by the opposition, when they have a very real opportunity to actually do their job, and actually attend estimates, attend all of the estimates every single day to ask the very questions that First Nations people in this country expect of this parliament.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Little, first supplementary.
Thank you. Well, 1,254 organisations failed to fulfil mandatory reporting requirements under regulator ORIC in the 2023-24 financial year. Non-compliance is a fairly good indicator that something's not right. Well, recently, Wellington Aboriginal Corporation Health Service was put under special administration for the second time in 4 years and joins the queue with so many others. Australians should know why your government and its bureaucrats didn't act on these matters earlier. What are you trying to hide?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. Well, it's clear to see where the coalition are going on this, President. It is very clear to see. On the one hand, they feign interest.
Minister McCarthy, please resume your seat. Order on my left. The minister will be heard in silence. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, President. On the one hand, they feign interest in closing the gap and the targets for First Nations people in this country. Oh, it's very true. It is very true that you feign interest in this. On the one hand, you do that. On the one hand, you do that, and then you wonder why we ask for further scrutiny across the Senate estimates for every single one of you. Every single one of you can turn up and ask those questions. In fact, I'm going to monitor how many of you actually turn up and ask questions. In fact, I'll go even further. I'm going to go back and find out how many of you actually ask questions, Senator Cash, around closing the gap.
Senator, order. Order across the chamber. Order. Senator Little, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Your binning of a standalone day focused on Indigenous Australians and the Murray-Darling Basin Plan matters is astounding at a time when you have shut your eyes and closed your ears on South Australia's algal bloom crisis and failed to act on Indigenous lives that are not improving. Does the Albanese government know what it's doing, and will the Minister for Indigenous Australians be at the table to answer questions regarding Indigenous matters when we ask them?
Order. Before I call the Minister, I'm going to remind people that the Minister has the right to be heard in silence, and that is what I expect. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. Well, Senator Little, if that's the nub of your concern that you won't be able to see me at estimates, I can tell you now I will be at estimates, and you will be very available to ask me questions. In fact, I not only sit in answering questions around Indigenous issues, I do sit and answer questions on health, on aged care, on local government, on regional government.
Minister McCarthy, please resume
they don't
your
want to know.
seat. I think that was you, Senator Nampijinka-Price. Apologies in advance if it wasn't. I have asked for silence, and that is what I expect. Minister McCarthy.
You see, they've got form, President. I'm here answering.
Minister McCarthy, please resume your seat. Senator Henderson.
President, just to clarify, correct the record, that was actually me. I'm making concerns about Indigenous boarding schools and the cuts to Indigenous boarding schools.
Senator Henderson. Order on my right. Order on my right. Order. Senator Henderson. I'm waiting for order. Thank you, Senator Ayres. Order. I take question time seriously. When I ask for silence, that is what I expect. My apologies, Senator Nampijinka-Price. Senator Henderson, you stood up with right intentions, but no. Then you proceeded to launch into some statement which you are not entitled to make. It's not a joke when I call for order. And when you completely disregard that, it's disrespectful to me. Minister McCarthy, please continue.
Thank you, President. The issue of closing the gap and reducing those targets is incredibly important for First Nations people in this country, and I do call on the Senate and all senators to take part and give the scrutiny that's required.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Thank you, President. With your indulgence, could I also acknowledge the delegation from South Korea and say I enjoyed my chat with them the other day and their interest in climate change and climate policy. My question is to the Minister for the Environment, Minister Watt. Minister, new research published in the journal Nature, emerging evidence of abrupt changes in the Antarctic environment on Thursday, the 21st of August, has shown Antarctica is at risk of abrupt and potentially irreversible changes to the continent's ice, ocean and ecosystems that will have profound implications for Australia and the planet unless urgent action is taken to curb global greenhouse gas emissions. Minister, have you read this new report, and do you acknowledge the very worrying changes this new research highlights?
Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President. Thanks, Senator Whish-Wilson. I am aware of those reports, and I saw them reported, in fact, I think last week. And I think all Australians, I would hope, would be very concerned about those developments when it comes to the Antarctic. We are seeing very worrying signs about the impact of climate change on Antarctica, as we are seeing similar signs evidenced on the environment generally in Australia and the world as a whole. I'm sure Senator Whish-Wilson, as a Tasmanian senator, is well aware of the investment that the government continues to make in Antarctic research and in funding programs to do with Antarctica. But again, the evidence that we are seeing highlights again the need for us to continue taking action on climate change, both as a country and as a globe. I recognise that Senator Whish-Wilson probably doesn't support the actions that our government is taking, but the reality is this is the first government Australia has had for a very long time that is taking climate change action seriously. It's why we increased the targets on emissions. It's why we've managed to reduce emissions. I see Senator Canavan perpetuating the falsehood that other members of his party have been perpetuating this week by claiming that emissions are going up or actually are flatlining, when in fact the facts, something that Senator Canavan is never very keen to recognise, but the facts show that Australia is tracking well to meet our 2030 climate pollution target, with new quarterly emissions data showing emissions fell by 6.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent in the year to March 2025. So I know it doesn't really suit Senator Canavan and all the other guests on Sky After Dark to actually talk about facts and data and evidence about climate emissions, but our policies are bringing them down and we want to do more.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Whish-Wilson, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, will the government heed the call of the 20 Australian and global scientists who published this paper, including Dr Petra Heil from the Australian Antarctic Division in Hobart, that stabilising the Earth's climate with minimal overshoot of 1.5 degrees is critical? Are you confident your 2035 climate target will be ambitious enough to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to mitigate these very concerning broad-scale changes in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean?
Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Whish-Wilson. What I can absolutely assure Senator Whish-Wilson and this chamber is that the Albanese government will continue to take strong action on climate change. I think everyone is well aware that it won't be too much longer now before the government releases its intentions around 2035 emissions targets, and they will be more ambitious than the ones that we have in place at the moment. But the reality is that even the targets we currently have of a 43% reduction by 2030 are far in advance of what we saw by the former government or any previous Australian government. I could remind Senator Whish-Wilson that there was another Australian government here once that tried to put in place a carbon pollution reduction scheme, but there was a party at the time who blocked that from happening. I've forgotten temporarily which party that was. It was the Liberals, but there was another party. Oh, it was the Greens. I forgot. Imagine where we would be. Yes.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Whish-Wilson, second supplementary.
I'm not sure why you do hate Julia Gillard so much in the Labor Party, but Minister, you mentioned the importance of science and investing in science, but one of our premier Antarctic science institutions, the Australian Centre for Excellence in Antarctic Science based in Hobart, is running out of funding. You've been written to by every crossbench MP and senator from Tasmania to ensure that funding continues. Minister, today can you confirm to the scientists in Hobart, many of them have just been to the Antarctic, that you will have long-term funding in MyEFO or in this year's budget?
Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Whish-Wilson. There's a number of senators who've contacted me about this issue regarding funding, most of whom are Labor Party senators from Tasmania, who have been very good advocates for their state and have been making the point to me. In fact, Senator Dowling did it only a few days ago, as have the other Tasmanian senators who've all raised this point with me. So we are aware that the very important funding that has been provided by the federal government to that research centre is reaching the end of its funding. Of course, that, along with many other programs across government, need to be considered through a usual budget process. But we're very supportive and very proud of the research that's been undertaken by those scientists, and I thank them for their important work. It is important that we have science informing government decision-making about the management of Tasmania. Recognise Senator Lambie, who's also written to me about this point.
Please resume your seat. Minister Watt. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Point of order on relevance, President. Could the minister please confirm today to those scientists that their jobs will be funded?
The minister is being relevant to the question. Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson. Minister.
Well, as I say, Senator Whish-Wilson, in running a budget and making these decisions, we go through a budget process. We recognise the important work and we'll consider that as soon as we possibly can.
Answering has expired. Senator Ananda Raja.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Minister Gallagher. Since coming to government in May 22, strengthening Medicare has been a central priority of the Albanese Labor government. We want Australians to have access to more bulk bill visits to the doctor. We want Australians to be able to access urgent care when they need it. We want Australians to have access to cheaper medicines on the PBS. Why has the government prioritised funding for strengthening Medicare in the budget?
Thank you, Senator Ananda Raja. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Ananda Raja for the question and also for her deep knowledge and experience in Australia's health system. In her previous life as a specialist doctor working across public health matters. So if anyone knows the importance of Medicare and investing in Medicare, it's Senator Ananda Raja. We have made it one of our key priorities, the Albanese government's key priorities, to make sure that we are strengthening the public health system, particularly in the areas that we have responsibility for in primary care and in the price of medicines. And it was very clear that when we came to government, we needed to do a lot of work to strengthen Medicare. We needed to bring it back from the brink of 9 years of neglect under those opposite, where they had failed to invest, where they had ensured that indexation had been frozen to the point that many practitioners were unable to bulk bill their patients anymore. And what did that mean? It meant pensioners, it meant families, it meant children, parents seeking help for their kids were having to pay more to see a doctor. So we did prioritise this in finding additional room in the budget. One of my jobs to make sure that we are able to resource these essential public services. So we've increased investment in Medicare. We've seen the biggest increase in Medicare rebates in just 2 years than the former government did in 9 years. And I think that says everything about the priority that we place in Medicare. Last year, as a result of our tripling the bulk billing incentive for pensioners, children and concession card holders, the biggest investment in bulk billing in its history, more than 9 out of 10 visits to the GP were free for people eligible for the incentive. So we can see that it works, and we aren't stopping there. We've got more commitments to roll out from November, and including the work that this parliament, the Senate passed on cheaper medicines yesterday.
Answering has expired. Senator Ananda Raja, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. The PBS sits alongside Medicare as one of the foundations of Australia's health system. Making medicines cheaper for all Australians is essential to easing cost of living pressures and improving the health of Australians. Since coming to government, what actions has the Albanese government taken to make medicines cheaper for all Australians?
Thank you, Senator Anandaraja. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Anandaraja for the question. And again, this was one of those areas where we came to government and we saw that not enough had been done to make sure that people could afford their medicines. So addressing Medicare and bulk billing, but also making sure that medicines were affordable, because we know when they're not, people don't take them and their health suffers. The legislation that passed Parliament yesterday means that from the beginning of next year, the general patient co-payment will be $25 for a PBS medicine. It has not been that low since 2004. That is the result of the legislation and the commitment that we took to the last election to make sure that people could afford their medicines. This built on the commitment that we'd done in the previous term to bring the price of medicines down to $31.60 and now bringing it down to $25. And of course, the other thing we did in the last term, which those opposite opposed, of course, was the 60-day prescribing to make sure that people could get 2 scripts for the price of 1, and those opposite opposed it.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Anandaraja, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. More bulk billing, more urgent care clinics and cheaper medicines. All of these primary care interventions work together to improve the health of Australians. How do these initiatives support the health of Australians, and how has the Albanese Labor government ensured we are able to fund the health care Australians rely on?
Thank you, Senator Anandaraja. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Anandaraja for the supplementary. Well, it's because the government has prioritised investment in the things and delivered on the things that matter for the Australian people. They care about their health care, they care about Medicare, they care about the price of medicines, they care about Medicare urgent care clinics, they care about getting access to out-of-hours care for those non-urgent conditions. And that is why that we have worked together across the government to find room for these really important investments. And I know those opposite, they can criticise spending, they see it as wasteful when you invest in Medicare, when you invest in medicines. We see it in the positions they've taken and how they tried to ridicule the Medicare urgent care clinics until they all started sending letters asking for one in their electorates. I think that was the turning of the tide when the letters came flooding in. Oh, could I have one of those things we don't like? So the Medicare urgent care clinics have been an important part, as has cheaper medicines, and this government will always prioritise Australians' health care.
Answering has expired. Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. It comes from revelations that, despite sanctions the government established in 2022 to stop the import of a range of Russian goods, Australia is importing products refined from Russian crude oil, or Russian blood oil as it's being called. Over 10 years ago, Australia was calling for blood diamonds to be included in the international definition conflict diamonds, and now we're accepting Russian blood oil. The Centre for Research and Energy says that in dollar terms, Australia has provided twice the support to Russia by purchasing blood oil products than we have to Ukraine equipment and training to help them win the war. What has your government done to quantify the volume of Russian blood oil that's being imported into Australia and the associated financial assistance to Russia's war efforts?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Minister Wong.
Thank you, Senator Lambie. And Senator Lambie, you're right that it's very important for us to do everything we can with others in the international community to impose a cost on Russia for its illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine. And since we have been in government, we have increased the number of sanctions. We've imposed strict sanctions and trade measures to restrict the import, purchase and transport of oil coming from or that originated in Russia. I also announced in June that we had our first sanctions against what is known as the Russian shadow fleet. That is the shadow fleet that they have established to try and avoid sanctions and other compliance measures, again, to help starve Russia's war machine of oil revenue. And as a result of measures we've taken, direct imports of these products have fallen from 80 million to 0 before Russia's invasion. But the senator raises a very important point, which I have made public comment about, which is how do you deal with energy products that come in via third countries? So that are dealt with in other countries and then imported in more as refined petroleum and other products from third countries. And regrettably, and I have pursued this, we don't have in place the mechanisms, nor does the international community, to track and monitor all of the products into third countries because they're not in place. Now, we are currently looking at what other options we could utilise to put further pressure on Russia's oil revenue. There isn't at this stage a global tracing system nor any regulation or oversight in the third countries that we're describing. So it's a real world problem, a real economic problem, but we do share the same objectives you do, Senator, which is to try and starve Mr Putin of oil revenue.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Lambie, first supplementary.
Thank you. To stand with Ukraine, oppose the invasion, impose sanctions and allow the import of Russian blood oil, enemy oil, provided another country processes or DFAT issues a sanctions permit is beyond belief. By the letter of law, it's legally okay, but ethically and morally it certainly is not. This isn't right and it's a low blow to Ukraine. Assuming you get regular reports, how many sanction permits has the department issued for Russian blood oil since 2022?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Minister Wong.
Thank you. Again, Senator Lambie, I would say to you, if we had the system to try and identify in third countries effectively, then of course we would want to try and utilise those systems. Those systems aren't in place, and this is a problem that all of our like-mindeds also face, including the European Union, which has announced an intention to do just this. In relation to sanctions, I will need to take that on notice to determine what permits have been issued. You will recall that we have very broad sanctions, economic sanctions on Russia, so permits, where required, would be across a number of areas, not just in relation to oil, but they are very restricted and they are only issued in accordance with the legislation and ministerial discretion.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Lambie, second supplementary.
Thank you. We've got laws that require companies to understand and take responsibility for their supply chains, that prohibit slave labour, human exploitation and to protect human rights. And while we provide arms support to Ukraine with one hand, we send money to their aggressor to destroy their country and kill their people. The hypocrisy of the situation is mind-blowing. What options has the Albanese government been looking at to address the situation when it comes to blood oil?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Minister Wong.
Senator Lambie, you raise the responsibility of companies, Australian firms, to assure their supply chains, and I agree with you. In fact, one of the ways in which we can try and get around the fact that governments don't have access to a third country tracking system for oil is to actually require, say to companies, look, you need to do more to assure your supply and your supply chain. Just as we say in relation to modern slavery, we want to make sure that modern slavery doesn't infect your supply chain. So I certainly agree with you. I've made that statement publicly, that companies should take responsibility for making sure that they don't, in actuality, get around international sanctions against Russia.
Thank you, Minister. Senator David Pocock.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Attorney-General, Senator Farrell. Minister, the government has announced new restrictions on freedom of information, including higher fees for applicants. Given that the FI system is already under strain, how can increasing costs for Australians seeking access to government documents possibly enhance transparency?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Pocock, for that question. I'd make the observation that the government is not proposing to increase costs for people who are seeking access to their own information. That was part of the question. I'm simply answering the question, Senator Anderson, but the freedom of information is a vital feature of our democracy. Yes, you can laugh, Senator McKim. But it promotes accountability and transparency of government. It enables Australians to access their personal information and supports the media, important media here, in their role as part of the Fourth Estate. But right now, the FOI Act is flawed and not working well for anybody, and our laws need to be updated. This week, the Attorney-General will introduce important reforms into the Parliament to improve the FOI system, and it has three fundamental precepts. Senator Pocock, anonymous FOI requests are no longer going to be permitted. Genuine FOI requests are prioritised, and taxpayers' money is saved on frivolous and automated requests. Listen to this, Senator Pocock. In 2024...
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator David Pocock, first supplementary.
Mr. President, Minister, a recent report by the Centre for Public Integrity shows FOI requests granted in full have plunged from 59% under the Gillard government to just 25% under the Albanese government, and outright refusals have nearly doubled over the same period. How can introducing fees that are likely to deter citizens and journalists be justified when the system is already failing to deliver transparency?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Pocock for his first supplementary question and his interest in this issue. You've quoted some figures there, Senator Pocock, but I'd like to quote some other figures, and that relates to the fact that in 2024 public servants spent more than 1 million hours processing FOI requests. If only those public servants could have been working on health, on the NDIS, on education, rather than focusing on answering frivolous FOI requests. Senator Pocock, this is a really important reform, because this is a transparent government. We are an open and transparent government. What you see is what you get.
Farrell. The time has expired. I'm waiting for order. Order. Senator Shoebridge, order. Across the chamber, I've called for order. I'm still waiting. So disrespectful towards me. Senator Pocock, second supplementary.
President, thank you, Minister. Unfortunately, the stats show that your government is actually the second most secretive on record, and having spoken briefly to...
Order on my right. Senator Pocock, please continue.
Minister, having spoken briefly to the Julie and Lisa this morning from the other place, and from the what is happening on the crossbench, who is going to support this friendless bill that will crack down on transparency?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. Thank Senator Pocock. I remember when we had the electoral reform legislation coming up in the last parliament, and everybody said, "Look, that legislation is friendless," and yet it was one. It passed the parliament. I think, Senator Pocock, if you're seriously interested in transparency, and Senator McKim, just be quiet for a little bit while I'm talking, because you can learn something from this as well. If the crossbench and the Greens and the Coalition are serious about getting genuine transparency, you'll be on board for these reforms. You'll be on. No. we can establish that these reforms are really important for continued transparency and the operation of government. They are sensible.
Thank you, Minister.
They are sensible
the time
reforms.
for answering has expired. Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. Well, my question is to the Minister for Women, Senator Gallagher. I note this is Women's Health Week, and I have noted a number of Labor senators mention this important occasion while talking about the government's work to promote women's health. I also note that women's health, safety, privacy and basic rights are being eroded in Australians' courts thanks to the Gillard Labor government's change to the Sex Discrimination Act 1984, which removed the definition of women and men. Minister, what measures is the government taking to ensure women's health, safety, privacy and basic rights are being protected by trans activism?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator Hanson for the question and for acknowledging the work that the Albanese Labor government has been doing in all of the areas that she's outlined in women's health, in women's safety, in access to skills and training, into economic independence. That is the approach that we've been bringing to it. In relation to the questions that Senator Hanson has raised, our job here is to make sure that we are in health, in women's safety, in economic security, in good pay for jobs, in being able to work extra hours, in investing in early childhood education and care, is that those policies support everybody. They support the whole economy. Gender inequality has been a feature of our country and a feature of our economy for too long. And it's not about one person getting a set of rights around another person. It's about addressing areas of inequality and driving broader equality across the economy so that everyone benefits. And that is what we've seen from—
Senator Hanson.
My question goes to the basics of my question. I said about safety, privacy and basic rights. The Minister has not touched on that whatsoever, and I didn't mention anything about what they're doing.
Thank you, Senator Hanson. The Minister is being relevant to your question. Minister, please continue.
Thank you. Well, I certainly heard Senator Hanson outlining a few of the areas that we've been working on, and we have been working on it. We do think that areas of women's health have been left unaddressed for too long. To not list a modern contraceptive pill for the last 20-odd years, to not list new menopause treatments for the last 30 years, that is a problem. And it does need a government that's prepared to invest in it. In relation to the question you have around the Sex Discrimination Act, which was in your first question, the Sex Discrimination Act makes it unlawful to discriminate on the basis of a range of protected attributes, including sex and gender identity. The government is not proposing to change that.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Hanson, first supplementary.
Women's health and safety is particularly at risk from the intrusion of biological males in women's sport, and this has been acknowledged by the new president of the International Olympics Committee, Kirsty Coventry, in her push for a blanket ban on transgender women from female categories at the Olympics. Does the government support a ban on transgender athletes competing in female categories at future Olympics?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Hanson for that question, and for I respond in the same way I've responded as she's raised this in a number of times over the years, where she's sought to demonise transgender people across this country, is that is a matter that the sports organisations deal with. They deal with it appropriately as the experts in that area. Our approach here, and some of the issues you raise about in my area of women's policy, the issues you raise have not been raised with me as Minister for Women by all of the range of stakeholders I deal with on a day-to-day basis around addressing women's policy and about driving gender equality. That's the position this government takes. It's the position we've taken when you've asked me before, and it'll be the position that we take in the future.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hanson, second supplementary.
Today, One Nation senators proudly signed a pledge to protect women's rights in Australia at the request of Women's Speak Tasmania. Minister, will the government acknowledge the Gillard government's change to the Sex Discrimination Act is threatening Australian women's access to female-only spaces and female-only sports and directly impacting the health and well-being of Australian women?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, Senator Hanson. In terms of issues that have been raised with me, and I'm not sure if that organisation you have spoken to have raised them with me. I don't recall that they have. We don't have any plans to change the Sex Discrimination Act. We believe in equality for all. We believe in respect and treating people respectfully, whatever their gender identity. That is something I think those opposite used to support as well, though I'm not sure that they continue with that position. And that's the approach that I bring to women's policy. I'm about driving gender equality. I want every individual across this country to be treated equally, regardless of the way that they identify. That is what I want, and that is what this government is focused on, whether it be in health, in education, in women's safety, in fighting against domestic and family violence. All of those areas, that is the focus, and that's how it will remain.
Minister. Senator Whittaker.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Senator Ayres. The Albanese Labor government was re-elected with a renewed mandate to address climate change. Achieving Australia's climate targets requires significant investment in a new, internationally competitive energy system and industrial capacity. Why is policy certainty essential for sending clear market signals to investors?
Great question. Thank you, Senator Whittaker. Minister Ayres.
Thanks, President. Thank you, Senator Whittaker, for that question. It is a very good question indeed. You're right. This government is making strong progress towards meeting Australia's climate targets. The government has listened to what Australian voters said, not just in 2025 but in 2022, to every politician in Canberra. We have listened and we are delivering. They want Australia to do its part in stopping climate change, both here and in terms of our contribution to international action. And that does mean technical and industrial collaboration with our friends in North Asia, for example, including the Republic of Korea, who were just in the room. And Australians want an affordable and clean energy system. That requires private investment, and private investment requires confidence and certainty. And you would have to have everything but confidence and certainty in what is going on over the other side of this chamber and the Liberal and National parties around the country. We do that with a framework broadly of fiscal responsibility too, which is why we didn't come to the last election with a $600 billion plan for nuclear energy that Australia couldn't afford, would never be delivered on time and would force Australian industry offshore. And of course, what we saw over the miserable period of the Morrison and Abbott and Turnbull governments was disinvestment in Australian industry and disinvestment in Australian electricity. We saw investment happening everywhere but Australia because the government couldn't take a rational, science-based, certain approach that provided investors with confidence.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Whittaker, first supplementary.
Thank you, President, and thank you to the Minister for that answer. Australia joined its international partners in committing for net zero by 2050. The Albanese Labor government has strengthened Australia's climate targets and has twice received a mandate to achieve them. Why does it matter whether Australia honours its international commitments?
Thank you, Senator Whittaker. Minister Ayres.
Well, I thank Senator Whittaker for her first supplementary question. I mean, Senator Hume gets it. She gets it. She said capital markets right around the globe require certainty.
We want to see more investment in Australia in this space, and if we don't have policy certainty, we'll miss out on those capital flows. Our international partners, domestic and foreign industry and investors watch Australia to see whether we can be relied upon. They watched it when the Coalition was in government. They saw Prime Minister Morrison and former Energy Minister Angus Taylor go to the Glasgow Conference of the Parties and commit Australia to net zero by 2050. Led by Mr Morrison, led by Mr Taylor, in there doing what was the right thing for Australia in our economic interest and committing Australia to a plan for net zero by 2050. Not much detail, a lot of press releases,
Thank you, Minister.
but that was
the
their
time
plan.
for answering has expired. Senator Whittaker, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Capital markets value policy certainty, and many of Australia's closest partners are also committed to climate action. What parts of the community would be affected if Australia abandoned its international commitments and adopted unclear and chaotic energy policies?
Thank you, Senator Whittaker. Minister Ayres.
Well, it's what Senator Scarr used to call Economics 101, basically. Now, Senator Patterson, it waves the textbook around. Senator Patterson said that the Coalition's platform policy doesn't matter. And there's a bit of a debate, I know, about whether they're in a rush to get to certainty or whether they want to have certainty later on. Senator Patterson said our position on this is academic. We're in opposition. Well, for something that's academic, there's a lot of focus. There's a lot of focus. If you followed Senator Canavan and Mr Joyce's proposition, it would make regional Australia weaker and poorer and have less investment and less good jobs. When they go out there fighting against renewables developments and transmission lines hundreds of kilometres away from where they live, they are standing in the way of good blue-collar jobs, investment in manufacturing industry and against the national interest.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Henderson.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Minister, last week Labor refused point-blank to rule out a spare bedroom tax. Will
Order.
Those opposite
Order.
may laugh.
Order.
You may laugh, Madam President.
Order.
But will you rule it out today, or do Australians need
Order
to keep their
on my
doors
rights.
open for the bedroom inspectors?
Minister, order. Order on my right. Senator Ayres. Senator Ayres, I've called you twice. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Well, I think that's really the sort of last question of this question time, and they've really gone to the bottom of the barrel, haven't they? Oh, look, oh dear, what do we need for a backup? Oh dear, what do we need for a backup? We'll go for the bedroom inspectors. We'll go for the bedroom inspectors, those very, very, very prevalent bedroom inspectors. I mean, this really is this with all the issues that the nation faces, that all the issues that the economy face, that people in terms of their cost of living, that we have in health, in education, in national security, foreign policy. But we're going to ask about the bedroom inspectors. I mean, yes, it's embarrassing, Senator.
Minister Wong. Senator Henderson.
Madam President, a point of order on direct relevance. I ask, will the government rule out a spare bedroom tax? Could the minister please answer the question?
Thank you, Senator Henderson. I raised with you last week to not go into statements. I've raised it every time you've asked a question, and I'm going to remind you again today. Simply come to your point of order. The minister is being relevant, and while the chamber is quiet, I expect the chamber to continue to be quiet. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Well, Senator, I can confirm to you that there are no plans for any bedroom inspectors in our government. Let me be very clear. And I'm asked about tax measures, and I can say to you, Senator, I can confirm that we will continue to make the tax system more efficient and fairer. And we will implement our policy to give every single Australian a tax cut. Every single Australian a tax cut. And we will add to the tax cuts that we have already delivered. And let me remember, Senator, if you're worried about tax, could you explain to us why you went to the election advocating for higher taxes for Australians? Advocating for higher taxes, because most Australians would be very confused as to how the Liberal Party somehow turned from the party allegedly of low tax to the party of higher tax. The party of higher tax. We cut taxes for every Australian on the 1st of July 2024, and we will do it again from the 1st of July 2026 and the 1st of July 2027. That is Labor's tax policy.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Henderson, first up. Order. Order. Senator Ayres and Minister Gallagher. Order. Senator Henderson, first supplementary.
Thanks, Madam President. Why is it so hard for the Prime Minister to simply say the words, "There will be no spare bedroom tax under the government I lead"? Is it because you actually plan to bring one in? Please, and I say to the Minister, please answer the question.
Minister Wong.
Well, President, Senator Ayres in his question went to the fact that the coalition continue to engage in the internal debate that they've had for 15 years, and yet again we see it. I mean, they're still talking about carbon taxes. You know, it is quite. I mean, most of these people weren't here when the carbon tax was like. It was a different parliament. I mean, the reality is, Senator, you and I both know that this is one of those questions that you're handed that really the sensible thing to do would have been to hand it back or rewrite it. Because frankly, it is ridiculous, and I think, Senator, you know it.
I'm waiting for silence, Senator Henderson. Order on my right. Minister Watt. Order. Order. Senator Henderson, second supplementary.
Thanks, Madam President. Minister, I note that you have still not ruled out a spare bedroom tax, and this is no laughing matter. If you really think this idea is as crazy as Australians do, why won't you just kill it off instead of keeping it alive in the shadows?
Thank you, Senator Henderson. Minister Wong.
Well, President, I'm happy to talk about what is a laughing matter and what is not. Well, the coalition's economic policy is a laughing matter. The coalition's environmental policy is a laughing matter. The coalition's economic policy is a mess, and we know that the coalition's health policy is a laughing matter. I mean, the reality is this lot have not learned from the election. They have not learned from the election. They still haven't learned. Senators on a free.
Minister Wong. Before I come to you, Senator Henderson, I do appreciate you're on your feet. I think I have called senators out by their first names enough. And quite frankly, you are being disrespectful. And I don't want to have to continue to do that for the next 33 seconds. If you can't listen in silence, there's the door. Senator Henderson.
Thanks, Madam President. A point of order on direct relevance. My question is, why won't the government rule out a spare bedroom tax? Could you ask the minister to be directly relevant?
Senator Henderson. The Minister is being directly relevant to your question. Minister, please continue.
Using your words, you talked about what was a laughing matter. Well, the Coalition's economic policy and tax policy is a laughing matter. The Coalition's health policy is a laughing matter. The Coalition's climate policy is laughably back where they were 20 years ago and 23 policies behind. And, of course, their nuclear policy remains a laughing matter because some still support it. I mean, you are not a serious party of government and you are not listening to your voters. You are not listening to where Australians are. And on that note, I ask that further questions be placed on notice.